Hey there, it's Saturday the 21st of April 2018 and we are live on Fundamental Changes for a bass session. So I think this might be the first bass session that they've done live on Fundamental Changes. I'm not sure if that's true or not actually, I might have just made that up. But if it is true, then I'm very honoured to be the first one. So thank you very much to everyone at Fundamental Changes for allowing me to do this. So yeah. Looking forward to hearing from everyone, and post your bass related questions, but I'm just going to start off just by playing a little bit, so while people log in and find me. So yeah, I'm going to very much let you guys decide where we go with this thing today. So post your questions, let me know what you're thinking, let me know your bass related questions or at least music related questions, and yeah, looking forward to hearing from you guys. So I should probably say, because this is Fundamental Changes, primarily a guitar channel. If you are a guitarist, don't turn off. We're going to be talking about a lot of musical related things which are going to be relevant, definitely relevant to guitar. And also I know that a lot of guitarists out there kind of have basses, or you play bass as a second instrument, or maybe you're thinking of getting a bass. So I'm really looking forward to hearing questions from everybody out there. So bass players, guitar players, anybody who's got a question that relates to the bass or maybe just to music in general, feel free to let me know, and I'm happy to talk about anything. So I'm also going to be talking today about my book. So my book that recently came out on Fundamental Changes, this book here called Improve Your Groove. So the reason I wrote this book is because I think that probably groove is the single most important thing that us as bass players need to master. So I'm going to talk a bit more about that later, and again, so feel free to get in touch and let me know where you're watching from, and let me know if you have any bass questions. So yeah, we're having a bass session here on Fundamental Changes. So this is a bass I'm playing. I know it's got 6 strings on it, but it's not a guitar in disguise, it is a bass. So yeah, feel free to get in touch with your bass related questions. So I'm going to be talking about a few things, particularly things from my book. So this is Electric Bass Improve Your Groove. So recently published on fundamentalchanges.com. So let me stop that for a second. I've started there with a very mellow tone, haven't I? It's a mellow Saturday, so we're all feeling nice and relaxed because it's the weekend. So let me talk a bit about Improve Your Groove and why I chose that as the subject for my book. Simply because I think it's the most important thing that you need to master as a bass player is groove. And what do I mean by groove? Well, specifically it's about having incredible timing. And in the book I talk about subdivisions a lot. Now subdivisions are really, really, really important. And you know, as bass players we can all kind of groove to a certain extent. You know, groove is something that comes naturally to us as bass players. We're good at that, but how do you get better at doing it? I don't think there's any bass player out there who can honestly say that they don't feel like they could get better at grooving, because it's what's going to get you gigs at the end of the day. It's what's going to get you work. There's a lot of bass players out there, like really, really good bass players out there who are making a living, even though their kind of techniques are fairly basic. You know, they don't have huge amounts of techniques, but the thing that makes them great, the reason they get loads of gigs, is because they have an incredible groove. So that's what this book is about here, and specifically it's about how do you play really accurately on subdivisions. So when you're playing music, it's not enough just to feel the beat. If you want to have a really incredible groove, you have to feel the subdivisions, especially the subdivisions that the drummers are playing. Drummers are masters of subdivisions. So what are subdivisions? Well, subdivisions is basically when you take a beat and then you just divide it up into smaller beats. So for example, an eighth note is a subdivision. An eighth note is probably the simplest subdivision you can have, because it's when you take a beat and you divide it into 2. So you have a beat and you have an offbeat. Now in the book, what I talk about is something called the connacol. The connacol. If you don't know what the connacol is, then I definitely recommend checking it out, because when I discovered connacol and started learning it, it completely changed my whole approach to rhythm, my whole approach to groove, and it actually made me a much, much better musician. So that's partly what I want to share with you in this book. Now, connacol is simply an Indian system of vocalizing rhythms. Okay, so they have different syllables that represent different subdivisions. So you could represent an eighth note subdivision using the syllables ta and ka. Ta is the beat, ka is the offbeat. Ta ka 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 ta ka. So in the instances of beats and offbeats, there's only 2 places where you can place a note, really. So you can either place the note on the beat, or you can place the note off the beat, and it's as simple as that. On the beat on ta, off the beat on ka. Now this is where we start in the book. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play you through a few kind of random examples from the book, just to give you an idea what's going on. So there's actually over 140 examples in the book. They're all, you can download them all from Fundamental Changes. So when you get the book, you can download all of the examples. They will come with the book. And also there's 5 pieces as well, play-along pieces, so you can use them as play-along tracks, and I'm going to demonstrate some of those as well. But first of all, I'm just going to literally open the book at the very first page. And I'll just show you some of the examples that we get on the first page. So this is where we start off at. So just some simple eighth note grooves. So we've got this one here. This is the very first example in the whole book. So just a nice simple funk groove there to get you going, and just another example at random from the first page. This is a reggae groove. This one goes like this. A 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's kind of where the book starts. So it's not for complete beginners. It's not for people who are just picking up the bass for the first time. But I'm guessing that that's probably not who I'm talking to here. I'm talking to people who are a bit more experienced. So it's for everyone else, basically. It really covers a really broad range. It goes from these kind of simple bass lines at the beginning, and I'm going to demonstrate some more complex stuff that comes later on. It's really not a book that's about technique. It's a book that's about timing and groove, and that's the thing. So I'm not demonstrating loads of difficult techniques here, and you won't find kind of exercises in the book. So you won't find anything in the book like this, because that's an exercise. It's something that's designed to help build your technique. Everything in the book is kind of musical examples. They're actual bass line excerpts. Each of the examples is an actual bass line that could be played in a piece of music, because the whole point of this is that the whole point of the demonstration is that you're seeing how these subdivisions actually relate to real music. That's the point. And there's examples from all different kinds of genres. There's rock, there's pop, there's funk, there's jazz, there's Latin, all of this stuff. So the whole point of this is, and the reason why it's so important is that the reason it's so important is because it applies to all music. So really it applies to everything. So yeah, let me play you a piece from the book. I'll play you a piece with one of the backing tracks. You get all of these backing tracks for free when you download the book. So I think you can get the Kindle version of the book. In the UK I think it's $4.99, so it's really not too expensive, and you get all of this stuff. And I think in the US it's something like $6.99 dollars. So yeah, and you can then download all of the tracks. So this first piece that I'm going to play you, this is one of the pieces from the book, and I wrote it to demonstrate playing on the beat, playing off the beat. So that's kind of exactly where I was with that one, really. So I've called it off the beaten track. The reason I called it off the beaten track is because it's demonstrating beats and off beats. So let me give you a bit of an example of off the beaten track. 1, 2, 3, 4. That was Off the Beaten Track from Improve Your Groove. That's my new book that's just come up from Fundamental Changes. So I very much want to be guided by you guys as to what we talk about today. So please get in touch with your bass questions. So I'll give you an example of some of the things that we can talk about. We can talk about rhythm and groove and subdivisions, which is kind of what I've been talking about so far. So that's more or less what the book's about. So that's, if you want to go through anything that's in here, that's absolutely brilliant. But we don't just have to talk about that. I recently put a video on my website, johnnycoxmusic.com, if you haven't checked that out. So yeah, I should say actually, feel free to find me on social media. So I'm johnnycoxmusic.com is my website, and on Facebook my page is Johnny Cox Music. I have a YouTube channel as well, so feel free to check that out. Lots of free lessons and stuff like that going on. So yeah, what can we talk about today? I recently put out a video called Everything You Need to Know About Harmony on the Bass, and it's only 5 minutes long. So it's a slightly facetious title, but the point I was trying to make with that video is there's a few very, very simple things that you need to know about harmony on the bass. And it's really not as complicated as people think it is. A lot of bass players, I think, tend to slightly shy away from the area of harmony because they think it's extremely complicated. But actually it's not. It's really, especially harmony when it applies to the bass, is not that complicated. So we can talk a bit about harmony and chord theory and stuff like that if you want to, and kind of how do you build your bass lines? Like how do you choose what notes to play when you're playing? I think we all want to get to the point where we can kind of build our own bass lines, and I think the ultimate test of musicianship is kind of, can you play what's in your head? Can you kind of imagine a bass line in your head and then play it on the bass? Well, we'd all like to be able to do that. How do you get to that point? How do you do it? Another good thing that we could talk about is how do you practice to get better? How do you practice to improve? I think everybody at some point in their kind of musicians' lives, I know I've done it loads of times, gets to the point where you kind of feel like you're practicing and practicing, but you're not actually getting any better. I know I've felt like that loads of times. So I think when you get to that kind of stage in your musicianship, you need to practice in a different way. You need to find different ways of practicing. So we can talk a bit about that as well if you want to, and yeah, we can talk about technique if you like. We can talk about how do you play. I mean, technique's not my favourite subject necessarily, because I just think groove is so much more important than technique. But having said that, technique is still important. You have to be able to have enough technique to play what you need to, and so technique is important as well. So we can talk about how do you practice to improve your technique, or what techniques are there out there that can make it easier to play the bass. Don't be put off by the fact that I'm playing a 6-string bass. I have my 4-string bass right here ready to go if we need it. I prefer to play 6-string basses, and if you want to, we can talk about gear as well. We can talk about different basses. I mean, you probably notice I play Warwick basses, so I am a Warwick endorser. So I only play Warwick basses. But we can talk a bit about 6-string basses and why 6-string basses versus 5-string basses and 4-string basses. I should say that everything in Improve Your Groove, so everything in my book here is written for 4-string bass. Okay, so I think 4-string bass is still the most common type of bass. I use 4-string basses for virtually all of my bass teaching because it's simply that's what most people play. So everything in Improve Your Groove is written for 4-string bass. I'm playing it on 6-string bass here, but don't be put off by that because everything is also playable on 4. So we can talk about all those things. We can talk about rhythm, we can talk about groove and timing, we can talk about harmony, we can talk about technique, we can talk about gear, we can talk about 6-string basses, whatever you want. So feel free to get in touch with me and get some questions going. And yeah, in the meantime, why don't I play something for you? Yeah, hopefully we'll have some questions after I've done that. I should say about this next piece that I'm going to play. This is a piece by Lawrence Cottle. I don't know if any of you know Lawrence Cottle. He's an absolutely phenomenal British bass player, and yeah, he's just one of the best around. So this is one of his tunes, and it's called Quite Firm. So yeah, that was me struggling to keep up with a Lawrence Cottle composition called Quite Firm. So Lawrence is a great bass player. If you haven't heard of him, then check him out definitely. He's absolutely brilliant. So yeah, let's carry on talking about some groove then. So we'll take some more examples from Electric Bass Improve Your Groove. So one thing I'd really like to introduce you to, if possible, is something called the Chromatic. Chromatic is the Indian system of reciting rhythm. And it's not just a system for learning rhythm, because it's also a performance art in its own right. So if you haven't checked out Chromatic before, then check it out. And we talked a little bit earlier about eighth notes, and we were counting eighth notes using ta, ka, ta, ka, ta, ka. So those are syllables from the Chromatic, ta and ka. Ta being the beat, ka being the offbeat. So when you have a note that's played on the beat, you play ta. When you have a note that's off the beat, you play ka. So let's have a look in the book, and let's use some examples. So we're on this is page 14 in the book. So we have lots of examples on page 14. They're all eighth note grooves. Let's have a look at some of these. So I might even put a metronome on here, just to kind of demonstrate the beat and the offbeat. So here's a metronome. So we've got ta ka 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 ta ka. Okay, so that's an eighth note groove because every single note lands on either on the beat, ta, or off the beat, ka. Ta, ka, ta, ka, ta, ka, ta, ka. So yeah, let me give you another one. Here's another example from the same page. This is page 14 in Improve Your Groove. Ta, ka, ta, ka, ta, ka, ta, ka, ta, ka. Okay, so that's an example of an eighth note groove. Okay, that's the simplest subdivision there is, really. Just subdividing a beat into a beat and an offbeat. Okay, so how else can you subdivide a beat? Well, you can subdivide each of those into two. So you can take your eighth notes, divide them into two, you get 16th notes. So that's 4 subdivisions per beat. So takita, takita, sorry, takadimi, I should say, takadimi. So takadimi, four syllables for 4 subdivisions. Okay, so that would be, with the metronome, takadimi, 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 takadimi. Okay, now the trick to having a great groove on the bass, or on any instrument really, is not necessarily being able to count just those subdivisions. It's being able to place notes individually on each of the subdivisions. Okay, so it's being able to place notes on ta, on ka, on di, on mi. So like takadimi, 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 takadimi. So that's a 16th note feel. Okay, if you've got a note on any of those 16th note subdivisions anywhere in your grooves, then you've basically got a 16th note feel. Okay, so let's find a couple of 16th note grooves from the book. So again, this is Improve Your Groove, recently released by Fundamental Changes. So let's have a look at 16th note grooves. Okay, so here's one. So we're on page 22 now. So this is where we're talking about 16th note grooves. We've got this one here that goes 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's a 16th note groove. It's got that takadimi, 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 takadimi feel going underneath it. Let me play you another piece. I'll play you another piece from the book. So this is designed to demonstrate 16th note grooves. So I've called this piece Sweet 16th for the simple reason that it's demonstrating how you play with a 16th note feel. Now it's actually got quite a nice slow 16th note feel, so kind of makes it a little bit easier to feel, a little bit easier to practice. So yeah, let's have a listen to it. Okay, so that was Sweet 16th. That was from my book, Improve Your Grooves. That was one of the examples in the book. So you get that full play-along track when you buy the book. You can download it from Fundamental Changes. So yeah, so we're talking about subdivisions on the bass here and how we can improve our groove on the bass by using subdivisions more and really thinking about subdivisions. So what makes a subdivision is that it's consistent. It goes through the whole piece. So when you're playing a 16th note groove like that, you need to be feeling that takadimi, takadimi, takadimi subdivision going the whole way through the piece. Okay, it's really, really important that you feel that subdivision, and then you can place your notes very accurately on them. Okay, so what's another subdivision? So the only other really major subdivision that you need to learn is how to subdivide into 3 or triplets. So that's like a kind of a shuffle feel. If you don't know what a shuffle feel is, a shuffle feel is when you're basically subdividing the beats into 3, just like a triplet. So like, so that's a shuffle feel. Now the conical syllables that we use for triplets and shuffle feels is ta-ki-ta. So 3 syllables to represent the 3 subdivisions. So ta-ki-ta, 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 ta-ki-ta. So that's your triplet or shuffle feel subdivision. So again, there's loads of examples of this sort of stuff in the book. Let me pick out a shuffle feel subdivision, a shuffle feel example for you from the book. Just to let me pick one out at random. So chapter 3 basically deals with triplet subdivisions. Let me find a fun one. Okay. Yeah. So much good stuff in here. So difficult to pick one. Oh, I like that one. So I think I demonstrated this one already in one of my videos on my YouTube channel and my website. So johnnycoxmusic.com. Check out my website if you haven't already. So this is an example of a kind of triplet shuffle feel. I think it's kind of subdividing into 3 basically. Now the reason that's a triplet shuffle feel is, let me slow it down for you a bit. I'm going to put that metronome back on. So we've got ta-ki-ta, 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 ta-ki-ta. Okay, so you see how that's a triplet feel? So every note in there is either placed on ta, ki, ta. It's placed on one of those three syllables. So okay, so you've got that ta-ki-ta, 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 ta-ki-ta running through the whole thing. If you want to play grooves like that with really, really good timing, that's the way to do it. So try to think more about subdivisions when you play. Hit me up with some questions if you've got any. So we are live at the moment. So this is Fundamental Changes on April the 21st, Saturday. So yeah, I'd love to get some questions, hear where you guys want to go with this. So we can talk some more about groove, and we can talk about subdivisions and rhythm. We can also talk about harmony. As I say, I recently published a video called Everything You Need to Know About Harmony on the Bass. So let's talk a bit about that actually. Let's talk a bit about harmony. So in that video that I posted, basically what I was getting at with talking about harmony on the bass is that there's only 12 notes, right? So there are only 12 notes. Oh, Simon's there saying, who are your main influences? Well, who are my main influences? There are, that's a big question, Simon. That's a big one. There's a lot of them. So they're not all bass players, to be honest. If we're kind of keeping it strictly to kind of electric bass players, then obviously Jaco Pastorius is a massive influence. Lawrence Cottle, I played one of his pieces earlier. He's a massive influence on me. And yeah, so he's taught me a lot. Like when I first kind of really got into electric bass in a big way, probably Marcus Miller I listened to a lot. I'm not so much into the whole kind of slap bass thing like Marcus does, but he is just such a great bass player. He's got such an incredible feel and timing, so I listen to him a lot. But one of my favourite bass players of all is actually not an electric bass player, he's a double bass player, which is Dave Holland. So another great jazz player, another British bass player actually, a lot of British bass players in there. So yeah, loads of great bass players, loads of great British bass players, but then I listen to loads of stuff outside of that. So Chick Corea is a massive influence on me as well as keyboard player. So loads of guitar players as well, I listen to loads of guitar players. So I mean, I grew up listening to people like Jimi Hendrix, so Eric Clapton as well. So I've got all of that stuff going on. But yeah, but anyway, what was I talking about? I was talking about harmony. So harmony. So how do we know? Basically what we're getting at is kind of building bass lines here. How do you build your own bass lines? Like if you're in a situation where, say, you're in a band and someone's written a song but they don't have a bass line for it, and you've got to come up with your own bass line just based on what you're hearing, or maybe based on the chords that the guitar player's playing. Like, how do you do that? I mean, obviously you can play the root notes, but you probably can tell with my playing that I don't like to just stick to just playing the root notes. To me, that's a really boring way of playing. So how do you know what notes to use? And that's basically what harmony is. I mean, as bass players, we are harmony players. Bass lines are harmony parts. You can't really get away from that. So that the first thing to understand when it comes to harmony is that there are only 12 notes. That's all there are. There's just 12. So you're basically deciding, when you're coming up with your own bass lines, you're just picking one note out of 12 always. So yeah, 12 notes: A sharp, B flat, B, C, C sharp, D flat, D, D sharp, E flat, E, F, F sharp, G flat, G, G sharp, A flat, and you're back to A again, and then everything kind of repeats. So there's 12 notes, and the thing to understand with harmony is that, first of all, there aren't any wrong notes. Okay, this is something I believe very passionately. There's no such thing as a wrong note per se. It's just kind of there's only 12 notes, so if you start classifying some of them as being wrong, then you're leaving yourself with very few options, and it makes your playing kind of uninteresting. So you need to use all 12 notes, and really you can find ways of using all 12 notes in almost any musical situation if you kind of use it in the right context. And that's where the skill of the musician comes in, to be able to kind of control the harmony like that. So in any kind of musical situation, generally you have kind of what are called inside notes and outside notes. And inside notes are simply notes that belong within the key that you're in, and outside notes are notes that belong outside of the key. And kind of the basic rule is that if you play the notes that are inside the harmony, the inside notes, they're going to be the safe notes. They're going to be the ones that sound kind of okay. And if you play the outside notes, they're going to sound kind of, you know, not necessarily wrong, because there are no wrong notes, but they're the ones that are going to sound more discordant, more difficult. So, I mean, just if I kind of play a G major chord for you, like that's a G major chord there. If I play a little chord progression for you in the key of G major, so we play, say, G major, oops, sorry, so G major, help if I actually started on a G major, that'd be a good start, G major, C major maybe, and then E minor, D major, something like that. If I just put that chord progression in there for you. So we've got G major, oh, I've got to delete my loop from earlier, that would help, wouldn't it? So starting from G major, we've got G major, C major, E minor, D7. Okay, now so we're talking about inside notes and outside notes. So there are 12 notes, right? Now there tend to be, whatever key you're in, there's usually 7 inside notes and there's 5 outside notes. Okay, so there's 12 notes in total, 7 inside, 5 outside. So if you've got a simple chord progression in the key of G major, like the one I'm just playing at the moment, your inside notes are going to be the notes from the G major scale, which are G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. Okay, now okay, so that's what the inside notes sound like. So those are kind of your safe notes. But you don't want to just play safe notes, because that's kind of dull. So your outside notes are the other 5 notes. They're the 5 notes that you didn't use. So G sharp, A sharp, C sharp, D sharp, F natural. Now if you play those 5 notes against the G major chord progression, it's going to sound kind of uncomfortable. I mean, that's about as kind of far out in terms of harmonies you can go. I'm going to do it just for a laugh. Why not? So this is all of the outside notes basically. Okay, so they sound pretty out there, don't they? They sound like wrong notes, but as I've said, there's no such thing as a wrong note. So how do you decide? How do you use these outside notes? Well, I like to think of them as being chromatic passing notes. So what I mean when I say chromatic passing notes is that you can use them to get from one inside note to another inside note. So for example, if you're playing in the key of G and you happen to hit one of these ugly notes, so you're playing in the key of G and you hit, as a mistake, a C sharp, which sounds like it's wrong, you can rescue it by simply moving to the next nearest inside note, which in this case would be D, and it kind of sounds like you meant to do it. Okay, so you see, it's just a way of using these outside notes, and it's a system that's called kind of tension and release. You often hear people, when they're talking about harmony, they talk about tension and release. So playing the outside note causes the tension. It's kind of ugly, it doesn't quite fit, but then you release it by going to a note that does fit. And so if you use that kind of, if you think about it that way, you can get away with playing almost any note in any context. It's just a question of what do you play next to bring it back in. So the most important thing, in terms of harmony, the most important thing that bass players can learn is chords, notes, okay? Arpeggios. Arpeggios is just a classical term for learning all of the notes in a chord, right? So, for example, a G major chord would just be G, B, D, G. Now, the reason you learn the chord notes is not because you only want to use those notes, it's because you need to know where those are, because those are your strongest notes. So when you go outside of the harmony, you want to bring your bass line back into one of those notes. Let's talk about the blues a little bit. The blues is a really popular topic for guitar players, so hopefully if there's any guitar players watching this might be a popular topic for you. So kind of, because the blues actually really demonstrates really well this idea of playing inside notes and outside notes. So when you're playing the blues in its simplest form is like a sequence of dominant seventh chords, right? So this is the blues in G. We're still kind of sticking to G. Why not? It seems like a good key. So we've got, say, a simple blues in G would have kind of G7, C7, and then it would have D7. And it's just those three chords basically, G7, C7, D7. That's kind of the blues in its simplest form. So chord theory would tell us that to play a G7 chord, we'd have G, B, D, F. So yeah, let's put a little loop on. So with the metronome. So that's our G7 chord there. So our inside notes there would be G, B, D, F. I mean, those are the notes from the chord. That's what chord theory would tell us are the right notes to play in that situation. Okay, so that's just four notes there: G, B, D, F. Okay, but one of the most popular scales that we like to play on the blues, it's named after the blues, is the blues scale. Okay, and the blues scale sounds completely different from that. Okay, so let me demonstrate the blues scale. It's going to sound like this. Okay, so that's the blues scale. Now, pretty much everybody knows the blues scale, right? We all know that scale. Now, why is that scale so interesting? That's probably the most used scale for soloing and improvising. It applies to so many different styles of music, but it's obviously named after the blues. And why is that scale interesting? Why does it create such an interesting effect? It actually creates a more interesting effect than just using all of the chord tones, like I demonstrated. This is the chord tones. So chord tones, blues scale. Okay? So why is that more interesting? Why is it better to play the blues scale? What's going on there? Well, the reason it's better is because it's using a mixture of inside notes and outside notes, and it's that feeling of playing some notes in and some notes out that creates that tension and release that makes it sound interesting. So what notes have we got in the G blues scale? So we've got G, obviously that's the root note, that's obviously an inside note, but then we have a B flat. Okay, now a B flat is very much an outside note. It does not belong in the chord that we played. So a B natural belongs in the chord we played, so the B flat, you can think of that as being a chromatic passing note. That's the note inside the chord. So here's our G, here's the chord tone, and here's the note from the blues scale. Now when you play it on its own like that, it kind of sounds ugly, doesn't it? It doesn't sound like it belongs. but it sounds good in the context of the scale because it's got that tension and release thing. So we've got inside note G, outside note B flat, then we got to C, which is an inside note. It belongs in the scale. It's not in the chord, but it is in the scale. And we have another outside note, C sharp. So we already talked about how C sharp is an outside note in the key of G. D is very much an inside note. It comes from the scale, the chord. F, that's another inside note because it's the dominant seventh of G. And then you're back to the G again. So you've got this inside, outside, inside, outside, inside, inside. Okay, so it's this combination of inside and outside notes. It's that combination of inside and outside notes that makes the blues interesting. So, hopefully you've enjoyed this. Unfortunately, we didn't get too many questions other than the one from Simon. Thank you for that, Simon. Appreciate your support there. But yeah, we've talked a little bit about groove and we talked about timing. Well, one thing that I said I was going to talk about before we finished is kind of why a 6-string bass, which is it's the question that I get asked most when I'm gigging is why a 6-string bass. That seems to be the question that everybody's really interested in. So even though nobody asked it here, I'm going to answer the question anyway. So the reason why I tend to play mostly 6-string basses when I'm performing is just because I happen to think that that's actually the right number of strings for a bass, and I will explain why. Hopefully, because this is a guitar channel, you're all going to support me on this. A better question for me is why do most basses have 4 strings on them? Because that's a kind of strange one on me, and I've done some research on this, and I've figured out why basses have 4 strings. But I happen to personally believe that now they should have 6 strings on them. So the reason that basses have 4 strings on them, the electric bass actually wasn't invented by Leo Fender, as a lot of people believe. A lot of people believe that the Fender Precision was the first ever electric bass and that it was invented by Leo Fender, but it actually wasn't. So before the Fender Precision, there was something made called, in the 30s and 40s, there was something made called a bass fiddle. Now this was basically the bass guitar in the form that we know it, but it was kind of shaped like a violin. So it was based on a kind of, the shape of it and the look of it was based on a violin, but you played it this way around like a guitar, and it was tuned like an orchestral double bass. So this is the origins of why a bass has 4 strings on it, because it was designed on the shape of a violin with the tuning of a double bass. And obviously those instruments, the orchestral strings family, they have 4 strings on it. So that's why. Now it was the Fender company and Leo Fender who kind of figured out that actually the bass would be a lot easier to play if you put a guitar body on it, because it's really awkward to hold a violin-shaped body in this position here. I've played violin-shaped basses before and they are not easy to play. Well, it's not they're not easy to play, they're not very comfortable to hold. So a guitar body is so much more practical. So what Fender really realised, and this kind of transformed the whole future of the instrument, was that a guitar body attached to this bass was the way to go forward, and that put the bass very much in the guitar family. Okay, so if the bass is in the guitar family, now why does it still only have 4 strings on it? That's my question. Okay, so the guitar family obviously is a family of instruments that has 6 strings on it. So it originally had 4 strings because it was being based on a violin and a double bass, but then it became a guitar, but they never changed the number of strings. Why not? So for me, it's just logical, because it's a guitar family instrument, that it should have 6 strings on it. So that's my thoughts anyway. I'm going to leave you, and thanks so much for watching, those of you who have joined in. And yeah, I'm going to leave you with another piece from my book. So this is Improve Your Groove on electric bass, and I'm going to finish off with the very last piece in the book. This is a piece called Straight in Time. I hope you enjoy it. So this is Straight in Time from Improve Your Groove. Thanks for watching.